So I want to first introduce Jeff Novitzski from UFC to discuss what his policies are and how he tests fighters. Jeff? Do you need the clicker? You got it?
No, she's going to run it.
Okay.
Thanks, Mike. I think it's been about the last 6 months that I've read it. The agenda for my topic of conversation today was decoding PED use through social media. And so for those of you that were here to hear me speak on that topic, I hate to disappoint you because I have no idea what the hell that means. None. In fact, if you go on social media, internet message boards, Twitter, people are very open about their PED use. And I've even heard recently that distributors or dealers of steroids and PEDs will go into these social media accounts to find customers. So that's kind of my spiel. If you've been looking forward to that the last several months, that's really all there is in PED use in social media. What I am here to talk about is my role with the UFC as the Vice President of Athlete Health and Performance. That entails primarily our anti-doping program, which has been up and running for about the last year. We've also done a lot recently with weight management issues and guidelines that we've given our fighters so that their weight management is healthier and safer. And then lastly, I'll talk a little bit about our Athlete Health and Performance Center, which is currently under construction and is going to benefit not only UFC fighters, but all combat athletes through research and publication of that research through reputable, peer-reviewed scientific journals. I'll start with a little bit about my background, which hopefully qualifies me to be in this position and then talk knowledgeably about performance-enhancing drugs. I was a special agent in the United States for the last 22 years before coming with the UFC last April. Started off with the IRS criminal investigation and ended up with the Food and Drug Administration. Back in 2002, I ran across an investigation called Balco Laboratories, and it ultimately ended up involving several dozen of some of the most high-profile athletes in the world, really, that were getting performance-enhancing drugs through Balco. Barry Bonds, Tim Montgomery, the world's fastest man at one point, Marion Jones, kind of the sweetheart of the 2000 Australian Olympics, and others. We actually indicted several individuals surrounding Balco early 2004, and several months later, George W. Bush, in a State of the Union presidential address, said this.
To help children make right choices, they need good examples. Athletics play such an important role in our society, but unfortunately, some in professional sports are not setting much of an example. The use of performance-enhancing drugs like steroids in baseball, football, and other sports is dangerous, and it sends the wrong message that there are shortcuts to accomplishment and that performance is more important than character. So tonight I call on team owners, union representatives, coaches, and players to take the lead, to send the right signal, to get tough, and to get rid of steroids now.
So during this period of time, Balco, my investigation, had hit the media widely. Sports media loved it. It was all over the place. My name was associated with this. The President of the United States gets up in the State of the Union address saying, hey, we need to get rid of these things. So literally the last 12, 13 years of my career, the phone never stopped ringing with agents not only here in the U.S. but worldwide calling me about a tip or an investigation they were starting because I was the name out there associated with having done one. So that led to further investigations over my career, a clubhouse attendant with the New York Mets, Roger Clemens. I worked very closely with former Senator George Mitchell and the Major League Baseball's Mitchell Report. And then lastly, the U.S. Postal Cycling Team and Lance Armstrong. That was my investigation that I initiated. So learned a whole lot about performance-enhancing drugs over the last 12 or 13 years of my career. Probably have interviewed, in my estimation, more professional athletes that use PEDs than anyone, probably. And not because I had anything special, but it was just a matter of having multiple cases and basically compelling these athletes to tell the truth. When I went and talked to them, it was under an official capacity, and if they didn't tell the truth, they were subject to prosecution. And we, in fact, did prosecute some athletes, Barry Bonds being one of them, for not being truthful. So typically when I came in the room, They knew, they had to tell the truth. And so I was able to get a lot of real honest, frank conversations with them. I always took the opportunity at the end of the interviews with these athletes to say, hey, why did you do it? What led you down this path? And 99% of the time it came down to one word, and that word was trust. And they said, look, I didn't trust my teammates weren't using, I didn't trust my opponents weren't using, and I certainly didn't trust my sports governing bodies or sports organization cared about the use because of the lack of a program or loopholes in the program. So when I came to UFC last April, that word was at the forefront of my mind. We needed to create a program for our anti-doping program that our athletes would trust. Next slide, I think. Go back. So this is actually the first couple lines of our anti-doping program. Central part of our expanded efforts to protect the health and safety of our athletes and also protect their right to compete on a level playing field. Our goal is for this program to be the best anti-doping program in all in professional sports. And now having been in it and having it implemented for a year, we have that. And I don't say that based on opinion. I say that based on 12 years of experience of being exposed to different professional sports and their anti-doping program. So why is that? Why do we have the best in sport? Next slide. This is probably the primary reason. The UFC does not administer or run our own program. So unlike the NFL, unlike Major League Baseball, unlike FIFA, you don't have the fox guarding the hen house. We're not determining who's being tested. We're not determining when they're being tested. We're not determining how many times they're being tested. We have no role in the results management to determine what the sanctions are against our athletes. This is being handled 100% by the United States Anti-Doping Agency, somebody that I've had 12 or 13 years experience with working through these previous cases. And they're known, worldwide as the most credible, reputable anti-doping agency in the world. Next slide, please. Very important for us that we contracted USADA to do this. We have over 500 athletes spread out amongst 37 countries throughout the world. A monumental task when you talk about a true year-round program, which we have. Our athletes are subject to testing any day of the year, any hour of the day. And that's quite an undertaking. Luckily, USADA has partners throughout the world so they can reach down to Brazil and test a Brazilian athlete at his home at 10 p.m. They can reach out to Russia and test a Russian UFC athlete at 6 in the morning. I don't know how we could have pulled this program off without the experience that USADA brings to the table for us. Next slide, please. Again, 365-day year of testing. This is super important for me to be able to say we have the best program in professional sports. When you look at these other leagues, the MLB, NFL, it's not truly 365 days a year. They may say it is, but in talking with these athletes, there's some level of predictability of when that test is coming. The example that I give all the time, not only 365 days a year, but the time of the day. The cycling investigation I was involved in, Armstrong and the U.S. Postal Team. During the Tour de France, these cyclists were able to manipulate an 8-hour window at night. So 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. in the morning, previously, they knew they wouldn't be tested. And maybe at the time, rightly so, these guys were riding up sides of mountains for 5 or 6 hours a day for 23 straight days. They said, we need to let these guys sleep. Well, they figured out that 8-hour window a test wouldn't be coming, so they were able to test themselves in the off-season, figure out what drugs they could do in what amounts, say at 10:01 p.m., that would be cleared from their system. Earliest they'd be able to test it at 6:01 a.m. in the morning, yet still retain the benefits. So that's a perfect example of why it's so imperative under a solid program that an athlete never know day of the week, time of the day, when that test is coming. To do this, we require our athletes to fill out what's called whereabouts. So our athletes must let USADA know where they are all 365 days a year. And that was a big challenge last year to tell the 500 plus athletes throughout the world that, hey, you need to let somebody know where you are. We actually, myself and some of the USADA people that implement our program do this as well. So just so we could get up and talk to our athletes and say, look, it's really not that big of a task once you get into it. I fill out my whereabouts as well. They actually have mobile applications on their phones so that if there's an update to their whereabouts, it's about a 30-second update where they can let USADA know, hey, I'm not going to be in New York, I'm actually going to be down in Brazil, so they can be located and tested. Next slide, please. There are penalties if they do not fill out their whereabouts accurately or it's incomplete. Again, this is super important. Somebody that wanted to go on a drug-taking vacation for a couple weeks, could potentially fail to file whereabouts or do it inaccurately, so there would be penalties up to a 2-year sanction if they don't file their whereabouts accurately. Next slide, please. Sanctions. A super important thing in any solid anti-doping program is the sanctions. Again, going back to those conversations I had with athletes, they would talk to me about the risk-reward calculation. I'm telling you, every professional athlete, it's going through their head currently. There is 100%, no doubt about it, a reward to these drugs, especially for a combat athlete. These drugs make you bigger, faster, stronger, give you more endurance, would make an already great athlete even greater. Combine that with the financial incentive out there, that reward factor is always going to be on professional athletes' minds. So what you have to do is set that risk so that it outweighs the reward. And we have that on our program. A first-time offense for a UFC fighter caught under this has the potential to be a 4-year sanction if there's aggravating circumstances. And when we go out and we educate our fighters across the world, and I start talking about a 4-year suspension in the UFC, I ask for a show of hands, who thinks they can rebound from being on the shelf for 4 years? There's very few, if any, fighters that can rebound from a 4-year sanction. And that's, again, done on purpose, to have that risk always outweigh the reward. Next slide, please. Another thing that makes this program strong is our athlete biological passport, which USADA keeps. So this takes the emphasis off any one drug test for any one particular drug. They are keeping track over time of certain markers in our athletes' urine and blood, so that even if a drug is not detected, either because it's cleared their system quick enough or it's a designer type drug where they haven't developed a test for, generally it will have an effect on their urine and blood markers, which will stay around for a long time. So as on the left side of the screen, you see wild variances on the top or the bottom of that athlete's biological passport. That, potentially in worst case scenario could be a positive test for an athlete. In other scenarios, it may cause USADA to focus more testing on those athletes which are showing these wide variances. Next slide, please. Dietary supplements. This is one that concerns me and scares me quite a bit for our athletes under such a comprehensive program. If you don't know this, the dietary supplement industry, not only here in the United States but worldwide, is a dangerous industry for an athlete under a comprehensive anti-doping program. My most recent career was with the Food and Drug Administration here in the U.S., which oversees the dietary supplement industry. Man, I saw hundreds of cases with supplements that were either contaminated with prohibited substances that didn't appear on the label. In worst case scenarios, some of these manufacturers spike their products with a steroid so that it works, so more people want to buy it and it won't appear on the label. In our education of our athletes, that's probably the #1 topic of conversation about how careful they have to be with their use of dietary supplements. Next slide. So we provide them, with tools. This is actually a website that USADA keeps. It's publicly available. You guys can all go get on it. And it's a high-risk list. I think it includes over 200 supplements right now that have prohibited substances in them. You see the fourth column in, anabolic agents, stimulants. These are supplements that anyone with a credit card can go online and buy. Not on the label in most cases. These harmful, compounds, not to mention prohibited in sport. So education is a huge tool that we can use to prevent this from happening to our athletes, and we pound this message in constantly and give them resources so that this doesn't happen. Hey, look, our program is in place to catch intentional cheaters, but the scary thing is someone who unintentionally can be taking supplements can get caught up and sanctioned under this program. No excuse though. I mean, our athletes are strictly liable for what's put into their body. Again, that's a message we've been hammering in for a year now, and they're given tools to make sure they can make smart decisions in their supplement use. Next, please. Brings us to our next topic, our weight management policy. This was something last December. Andy Foster in California had a great summit on weight management issues. Next slide, please. This is a little bit about what we implemented. We announced this several months back, but we now highly encourage and expect our athletes, when they show up the week of their fight, which is generally a Tuesday before a Saturday fight, to show up within 8% or under of their goal weight on Friday. This was not a number we pulled out of the air. We've talked to world-renowned experts in hydration, sports nutrition, who said based on the circumstances of checking in on that Tuesday, typically they're off a long plane ride, still eating a lot, have overly hydrated, drinking probably more water than they usually would. Factoring that in, you're talking the end of the week, maybe a 3 to 4% water loss weight to make weight. According to experts, what they've told us, that's a safe and healthy way to do things. So we are highly encouraging our athletes to do this. We actually now offer our athletes, as they check in, to monitor their vitals throughout the week. So a lot of that's an educational tool. Hey, if you're losing a bunch of weight the last week, look what's happening to your blood pressure throughout the week. Look what's happening to your resting heart rate. Look what's happening to your temperature. And they take that away from the fight week, hopefully go back home and say, yeah, those are some things that I saw, measurable things that I don't like. I need to change the way I manage my weight coming into a fight. As soon as our fighters step off the table now, we now have what's called our hydration table. And again, we've consulted with experts and said, what would be the optimal things to eat and drink after that weigh-in, 24 to 36 hours leading up to that fight. So they have these at their fingertips as soon as they walk off the scale. Many of our athletes now have employed nutritionists that basically give them these tools, but we want every single athlete to have access to that, and so we now do that. We've also been working with several athletic commissions for permission to provide optimal food and beverages the night of the fight. And this was a long-standing rule that within the locker room, typically the only thing allowed by most of you was sealed water. We talked to, again, experts saying, hey, what other sport do you have where you're not allowed to at least eat or drink a little bit something more than that leading up to a competition? So what we've done now in several states is provide clear plastic bags that inspectors have gone in and taken a look at first. Nothing fancy. I mean, we're not talking Thanksgiving, turkey dinners. We're talking some carbohydrate beverages, fresh fruit, some protein bars, things like that. And you wouldn't believe, for such a simple gesture, how appreciative the athletes are. They said this was awesome, that they would often get very hungry in those hours leading up to the fight, and would have loved to eat a pretzel or a cracker. Those are the simple things that we're now providing, and excellent feedback. The athletes appreciate it tremendously. Morning weigh-ins. We started out in California several months ago. We've done several in Nevada. Again, you talk about universal, overwhelming approval by athletes. They love it. And, I understand, and I've heard a little bit of, the counter argument. Well, if you're doing things earlier in the morning, aren't you encouraging, maybe even more severe weight cutting, more severe, putting on weight on the other side? And we haven't seen that. I think part of it is our guidelines where we're encouraging to show up within a reasonable amount of weight. Next slide, please. And here are some of those statistics that I put together. So this, again, is check-in weight the week of our fight, starting back in Las Vegas. And as you see, this is average for the card, all of them well below, well under 8%. Again, this is average. It doesn't mean that all 24 or 26 fighters on the card were under that, but on average, I'd say all but 4 or 5 per fight card have been well under 8%. So they're listening to this. So when you combine those two things, when you combine a moderate weight loss that last week with the early weigh-in, fantastic in terms of the health and safety of the fighters, in my opinion. Those extra couple hours to rehydrate, to make sure they're eating optimal, nutrition, are, I think, invaluable come fight time the next night. And hey, it could be just coincidence, but since we've started doing these early weigh-ins in California, we have seen just some tremendous fight cards. And in the anecdotal information getting from the athletes, the next day, I always encourage them, hey, come up to me, Saturday night after your fight or Sunday morning. Let me know how you felt, how different you felt. And again, really universally, the stories I'm getting are, I felt tremendous. I felt I had energy, endurance. My legs were there. In the past, they weren't. So, to me, everything that I'm seeing, and we have a short sample size, I agree, but everything's been very positive with these early morning weigh-ins. That leads us, hold on one second, to our next slide. So we currently have under construction, you guys can drive by later today or this week, at the corner of 215 and Jones, our Athlete Health and Performance Center. So I'll show you a little bit of video of what it's about and then talk a little bit more about it.
Here we go, baby. How good is this? Get on.
UFC has transformed from spectacle to global iconic sports brand in a single generation. Now the world's fastest growing sport. UFC has emerged as a leader in sports performance through the launch of the UFC Athlete Health and Performance Center. Scheduled to open in 2017 in UFC's hometown of Las Vegas, the 30,000 square foot facility will serve as a beacon of athletic performance for mixed martial artists and other professional athletes alike. The Athlete Health and Performance Center will revolutionize the way athletes prepare for competition through innovation, unparalleled strength and conditioning programs, world-class injury prevention and rehabilitation services, and advanced nutrition and performance optimization. The Athlete Health and Performance Center will also bring the world's elite athletes together through cross-training programs, research, and education. The UFC Athlete Health and Performance Center. The future of athletic performance is here.
Next slide. So I'm excited about our anti-doping program. I'm real excited about our weight management, guidelines. I'm maybe most excited about this. This benefits, in my opinion, not just UFC athletes, but the idea here is to benefit all combat sport athletes through use of the Performance Center to conduct research on fighters and to publish that research in scientific peer-reviewed journals. For instance, weight management. Our plan with this is to bring in fighters when they're not fighting, put them through some mini weight cuts, rehydrate them, renutrition them, and do measurable statistics on their performance. And not only use that just for UFC athletes, but again, publish this publicly so that any combat athlete can learn from this. Super excited about this. I think, in the years to come, this is going to change the game in terms of health and safety that we'll all be able to use to ensure both short and long-term health and safety of our fighters. Next slide. That's it. I appreciate the time this morning. Being a former, government employee, I understand where all of you commissions come from, that you all have each have your unique individual rules and regulations you must abide by. We really appreciate you working with us. I do throughout this last year. Look forward to doing so in the future. But I think the bottom line is we're all here for the same reason. We're all here to protect and ensure the short and long-term health and safety of our athletes. And so I look forward to doing that with you in the future. At this point, I'm going to bring up representatives from the United States Anti-Doping Agency, or USADA, who actually runs our anti-doping program. Thank you guys very much.